Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I am interviewing Kristine Carlson on the show today, and she has a book out called Heartbroken Open, a true story of coming alive again after profound loss. And you probably already know who she is. So she and her husband co-wrote the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff books. Do you remember them? And she actually just had a biopic on Lifetime, a movie made about her life that was starring Heather Locklear. The name of the movie is Heartbroken Open, a true story of coming alive again and profound loss. Right, that's the book. And actually the movie is, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. Anyway, it's super exciting. I love talking to her. She's really an expert on loss and grieving, and we talked quite a bit about that and how she got through this. She is a multiple-time New York Times best-selling author, a renowned speaker, recognized worldwide for the global success of Don't Sweat the Small Stuff book series that she co-authored with her husband who passed away, Dr. Richard Carlson. So the movie is really about the year after her husband died. So this is her book. It's very beautiful. I started reading it. I love it. And I hope that you enjoy this episode with Kristine Carlson. I am so excited to welcome Kristine Carlson to the show. Kristine, Heartbroken Open, a true story of coming alive again after profound loss, this amazing book that I did love so very much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Terri. It's wonderful to be here.
So I want to start with, I have a lot of people in my audience who have written in who have lost spouses, who have ended up divorced, and where they get stuck in the grief. So I know you have had lots of grief and gone through lots of grief. Is there a process that helps a person recover from that kind of loss?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say there's not just one process of recovery from loss. And I believe that each individual has to really design their own recovery time and how they're going to recover. I think that we grieve in our own time, and I think we go through grief in our own way. I have a few ideas about grieving that have come through my own journey. And one of the things I really do like to say to people is that, grief is something you do when you're ready. But it doesn't go away. So there's no denying grief through loss. It'll only save its time for you, and it will show up when you're ready to express it, when you're ready to go through the process of healing. And that's the way I look at going through grief is a process of healing. When we lose somebody we love, and depending upon how significant that person is to us, it leaves us feeling very wounded, and we are wounded. And yet, as human beings, we're not too unlike animals in the sense that animals also grieve their losses. But we must understand that we can't just pick up our lives and go on as usual. That just simply won't happen. Life is going to be different, and you're going to go through a period of change and transition. And grieving is really a detaching process because you are attached. And that's what we do. We attach. And yet grieving is about accepting what's happened, accepting this huge change, and finding your way back to living a life of joy and finding your way back to life.
How long did it take you after the loss of your husband?
Well, that's a loaded question because I have to say that I looked at it in stages, I would say I really began to feel very, very healed when I wrote a book called From Heartbreak to Wholeness, The Hero's Journey to Joy. And that was 10 years later. So the first 2 years were very raw for me, like they are for most widows and widowers who lose their spouse, somebody they really deeply loved. The first year is very shocking. The second year, you're sort of like, oh my God, this has happened. The reality of it sets in. And then, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and on years, you're just in a process of really just, trying to figure out your life without that person. And coming to an acceptance. I knew the day that I came to acceptance, Terri, when I woke up on Richard's side of the bed. I'd gone to bed. I'd come in from going out with some girlfriends that night. I'd gotten my clothes off and jumped into bed, and I didn't even realize I slept on his side of the bed, but I hadn't slept there for 2 years. And that night, when I woke up in the morning, I woke up and I felt different. And I was like, wow, I have just gone through a whole new level and layer of my grief to a level of acceptance. And then I knew the next pinnacle point for me of knowing that I was really healing was I had returned from grief to gratitude. For a long time, people would say to me, well, you're so lucky, you're so lucky you had such a great love. And I would say to myself, or I would sometimes even say to them, I don't feel very lucky right now. This is really painful. Like, this is excruciating.
Right. Thank you for your hyper positiveness. That's helping you, but not me,
Right. Exactly.
People are like, you're fine. It's great. You're like, no, actually not.
You're so lucky. You had such a great love. Some people never experience that. I'm like, no, they're lucky.
Wow.
Of course, you don't feel that way after you've healed. That's when I knew, because of course I'm so grateful for the love that I've had and the love that I shared with an amazing man. And I'm grateful every day now, but there was a time period. No, I wasn't grateful because it was just too painful.
So you co-authored the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff books with Richard. How was that for you to, it's like you had this collective creative experience, and then half of that was gone. Like, how was that for you to pick up writing again after he transitioned?
Well, interestingly, because that was such a huge part of our connection, was working together, and also just our early morning hours, just really just having our coffee and strategizing, talking. Either we're strategizing about how we were going to parent our teenage girls, or we were coming up with chapter titles for Don't Sweat the Small Stuff books and other books. So for me, I began writing in a different way right away. I found that the early morning hours when I'd have coffee with Richard were my most painful. So I opened up my computer and I began to journal. Mm-hmm. And once I started journaling, I realized how incredibly healing that was to journal. And I started to feel Richard actually coming through the keyboard of my computer, which was so powerful. And so it really began to feel like this deep connection I still had with him. And that was that really helped to facilitate me moving forward in my life. And so it was a different kind of writing. I'd never been much of a journaler before that happened.
That is so interesting that it's sort of like the connection was still really there. And yeah, I think you don't have that experience until you have that experience, right? You don't know what it's going to be like. So moving into continuing on the theme of loss, do you feel like there is like a quicker way that people can do it? Are there shortcuts that people can take when they are grieving a loss?
I think that the greatest shortcut a person can take in grieving their loss is allowing themselves to grieve and to surrender to the feelings when they come, to surrender to the grief in a way that's healthy, to cry a lot, to think of crying and expressing grief as a way of emptying grief. And if you empty it, that means that you're carving out a place in your heart, and you're carving out a place in your being that's going to be filled with something else. And what you want to do is fill that emptiness up with more life, is choosing life. And to realize that I know this woman right now, and she's grieving the most beautiful young daughter from COVID, for example. The most gorgeous young woman, just a higher being soul. This woman died at the very beginning of COVID from COVID. And I know this woman who is very spiritual, and she's grieving the loss of her daughter. And already after a year and a half, she's saying the same thing that I realized after 10 years, which was, we have a choice to make as the surviving person in loss. And that is to choose more life and to choose joy. And that is our only choice at certain places when we're in our loss, is you must decide and choose to live. And you live not only for yourself, you live for the person that you've lost. You bring them into your consciousness and into your world every single day. And that's how you live. You keep that relationship, but you transition into a new relationship with your loved one. But you bring them into your thoughts and into your life, and you let them live through your eyes. You let them be in your world in a new way, but not in too much the way they were. They're just a lot more agreeable when they're in that space. They go with you everywhere you go. They don't have anything to say about it.
As a therapist, I've seen clients, and I've seen this more than one time with someone who had a profound loss, that they were holding on to their grief so tight because it was almost like holding on to the grief was like holding on to the person. And they felt that if they released the grief, they were dishonoring or they were doing something bad to that person. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's so true. And I think there's a lot of guilt, first of all, that a lot of people feel at being the one that lives versus the one that dies. And I think that it's true that people have the belief that grief is love. Grief is not love.
So good.
Grief is an emotional response to loss. But grief and love are not the same thing. And so I think once you really make that hard line definition of what grief is, and that is it's an emotional response to loss and a process of healing, and then you realize, well, it isn't, and this is what I work with a lot of widows and a lot of people that have gone through loss, and this is always what I say to them. I say, if it were reversed and your husband were sitting here and you were where he is, then what would you want for that person? What would you want? Would you want them to be grieving you forever? No. Love, and what love means is that our person who's on the other side or who's passed, their deepest desire is for us to live. That is what love is. That is pure love, is to live and to honor life and to honor the love that you shared with that person by living. And I think when we start to redefine how we do that, how we step into our lives, and again, if you step in thinking that you're really carrying that person with you, you don't have to move on from your loved person. You just have to move forward. There's a big difference.
Without a doubt. It's sort of like someone saying, I want to get over this. I'm like, you won't be getting over, but we could be integrating, right? Which is different, because that is the going forward. That is living life in a different way. I myself married a widower almost 25 years ago. And that I really got interested in this whole concept of loss. I was already a psychotherapist, but in what was the right way to relate to these 3 teenage boys that I inherited, how to honor. And I remember I said to my husband, Vic, I said, where are all the pictures of Donna? That's the wife who passed. And he said, well, the boys have them in their bedroom. But, my ex-wife, he had a second ex-wife, she didn't like them in the main part of the house. So I took them down. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Why can't we love Donna and they love me too? Like, isn't there enough love to go around? And, for me, my response was, I felt like I was a tag team with this woman that I never met, but I felt so much love and connection to her. And I have chills right now. I still do, because if not for her existence, my joy, my found family, my life wouldn't be this way,
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful way to look at it. And then certainly, I'm sure that your husband is so grateful for that, because really, honestly, if you're ever going to be in another relationship with another person again, they really do have to embrace the loved one that's passed, especially when it's a spouse, in that light. And any man or woman that can't is probably not going to survive in that relationship for a long term, because that connection, when somebody dies like that, that connection, it's not a divorce. They're not an ex.
Right.
It's a person that you're married to still in your heart and soul, and that you love. Mm-hmm. And you just know that they're not in body anymore. And of course, being a human being, we need to have relationship. We need love. We need sex. We need all the things that, that being in body is. And so, but it doesn't change the fact that love still exists. But I think, like, Terri, it's beautiful what you did for your husband, because the truth is we have the capacity to love so many people in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. And it will never be the same relationship that he had with her or whatever. Or when I'm in another relationship, it's not the same relationship as I had with Richard. It's a different relationship, but the love can be just as great. And it can be, it can be even greater on some level, because I think a person has gone through loss is a much deeper person and has really experienced the depths of sorrow. And when you come out of that, the depths of sorrow, what you've essentially done is carved out a place for yourself to experience the absolute heights of joy, higher than anybody could even imagine. And I think that's the part of grief that not many people understand or talk about, but that's what you see when you see people who have gone through something really horrific, but they're all lit up. They're all lit up with light because they've made it through that dark night of the soul passage. And but what an incredibly evolved outlook you have.
Well, thank you very much. It really is just how I actually felt. Honestly, I didn't feel threatened. And I also was prioritizing the kids. I love the image, right? You have this analogy of making space in our heart. So you go through the terrible grief and the terrible loss, and processing it means making space for more of the good stuff. And so much of what you're talking about is giving yourself permission to live again and to know that is what your person would want for you. So I have a question. How did your life story become a Lifetime movie? Because when I saw that it was coming out, I was so excited. So please tell us.
Oh, thank you. I had this woman that her name is Maura Dunbar. She's an executive producer. She produces a lot of Hallmark movies, and she's been in the television business for years and years and years. And she actually had approached Richard when he was alive, really long time ago, 20 years ago, to take Don't Sweat the Small Stuff and turn it into like a kind of a family sitcom. And a generational family sitcom. And we had signed a deal with ABC at that time. And then it didn't go through because ABC went through reorganization, and it didn't go through. And Richard and I were like, phew, like, because our kids were little and we were like, oh, that's probably wasn't going to be the best thing for them, like to live under that kind of scrutiny. And so we were really relieved. And then she came back to me after Richard died and said, I still really want to do something with Don't Sweat the Small Stuff in honor of Richard's legacy someday. I don't know what it'll be, but are you open to it? And I was like, of course. And we then sold it to Sony Television, and then they didn't develop it. And so I got the rights back. And then Lifetime came to us about 3 years ago and said, we would really like to buy the rights. And so they did. And then we settled on my story as being the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff story, for the, just that I had the best story for it. And so that's how it became a Lifetime movie. It was Maura. She's the one that was so devoted and dedicated to it.
How was it having Heather Locklear play you?
Well, it was so sweet. Like, honestly, I love Heather Locklear, and I always did, of course. And I was just, Wow. I was like, wow, really? Oh, cool. But then what became very, very interesting was when she and I met, we had all these just very spiritual connections. It was just wild. It was like, it was the most wild thing. She was just blown. I mean, so for example, one of the connections we had, and I just knew Richard was behind the whole thing. It was so funny because her college roommate, this is going to blow you away. Her college roommate, named a woman named Janie, turns out grew up with Richard and was Richard's very first love interest in junior high. And and so we were like, that, how does that happen? That's like that whole, I think that's 3 degrees of separation. I don't even think that's 6 degrees of separation.
Right.
But yeah, and so we developed a very sweet friendship connection, which it's interesting the media really picked up on, which they highlighted often throughout the promotional period of the movie, was just what good friends we had come to be through this process of her studying her role as me and becoming me for the movie. And so, yeah, it was a thrill. And then we're friends today. I think I'm going to go see her pretty soon. I'll spend a night with her when I'm down in Southern California, and we'll hang out, and then I'll, go about doing other stuff. But we text each other and talk often. She's a sweetheart.
That's so amazing. I wondered if it was surreal to see your life being played out. Like, what was that experience when you first saw it?
Oh, yeah, because a lot of the dialogue they actually did take direct from my interviews with the writer, and so it was pretty crazy. There were some scenes that I thought, oh my God, that could be us. Like, that really could have been us. And I thought Jason McDonald, who played Richard, did a wonderful job of capturing Richard's light and his playfulness and, just his presence. So and he really, really enjoyed the role a lot. Yeah, it was surreal. And I thought, what an amazing thing that I've had this opportunity to review. I mean, one of the worst years of my life, because it really did center around the first year of grief, but also one of the most beautiful parts of my life, which was our family life as a whole family and my love with Richard. I thought they did a beautiful job. Lifetime movies are Lifetime movies, so that's what I can say. But they did a really, really wonderful job of showing, in a very Hollywood nice way, the messiness that a family goes through in grief, and acknowledging children in it too, that it isn't just about, the widow's loss. It's about the family loss. It's about that the kids have lost their father, and that's huge. It's huge. It's huge for the family.
It is. Yes. Yes, indeed it is. And everyone.
Have you seen it yet?
I haven't actually. No. I can't.
Yeah, you can search it now. Like if you have Amazon Prime, or if you have Lifetime Television Network, you can just search it on your search engine and see where it pops up.
Right on. I'm having a girlfriend's weekend this weekend. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Oh, good. Yeah. Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. The Kristine Carlson story is what it's called.
So exciting. I have a question for you that I ask most of my guests because I'm obsessed with boundaries. I love to know personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it, if you have?
Boundary struggle. Oh boy. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I do kind of, I am a really good boundary setter. It's funny, I do it very lovingly, but I'm very firm in how I set boundaries. Wow, I'd have to say, Okay, I can think of one instance recently. So I'm not one that will allow somebody to take me hostage in a conversation. So, sometimes you get into these conversations with people and they just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, and they're not even taking a breath. And I'm definitely one that I'm willing to just say, hey, excuse me for a moment. Excuse me for a moment. I'll either try and redirect them, or I'll say, hey, excuse me, but I have to go get a glass of water now. Or excuse me, and I'll ask them a question or something.
Yep.
I think boundaries are really huge for everyone. And, I had to set a boundary with my daughter recently. Like I had to say, hey, you're living at my house. You shouldn't be here. Please don't comment on my lifestyle, like it's my life now. Like you're not the parent here. I'm the parent, but this is my life. And,
Right.
there's just, there's boundaries with, team members in business and, all sorts of things. I mean, boundaries are huge for people. And then I was at a retreat recently and we had one woman there who, she didn't, I think there might've been even a disorder or something. She didn't have social cues down. So it was hard for people to know how to set that boundary. And so I just pulled them aside and I said, look, I said what I just said to you. I said, you don't have to be taken hostage here. This is a good opportunity for you to be loving, kind, compassionate, and set a boundary and know that it's okay. And it's okay to honor yourself and what feels safe for you and protective and your experience over just being, a carpet being walked on, like I just say, you never have to be anybody's carpet that you're being walked on.
Fact. I love those stories because it's so true. And we can all identify with each one of them because it's a new phase in a relationship with a grown child who's no longer a child. We have role reversals sometimes that happen, or at least your daughter thought that was going to happen until you said, no, I don't think so. And nobody really taught us how to do it. So I love to hear people's stories. So thanks so much for sharing that. And you stepped into this role, right, as the brand leader for everything that was going on. And I imagine the don't sweat the small stuff, the books, all the things. I imagine you had to have decent boundaries, at least to do that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And yet I think boundaries are something we're always learning. It's just like, it's always like in business, I've certainly learned to go from being naive to more discerning.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of ways my husband protected me and was extremely protective in ways I didn't even know until after he was gone. And so I had a lot of hard lessons to learn. I would call it a very expensive curriculum sometimes. I would say, wow, this has been a very costly curriculum. But that's just all part of it. That's all part of it, and I'm not one that beats myself up too badly on things. So I definitely, I'll sit myself down and say, you better get this, you better understand this now. Because if you don't understand this now, it's going to come around again.
Yep.
And I look at I take responsibility for my own actions, for my own inaction sometimes. I take responsibility in any conflict for what's mine to take responsibility for. But then I let go of the rest. And I realize that anytime, whether it's in business or it's in our personal lives, our personal relationships, you are 50% of everything. If you're dysfunctional and you're not healthy, then you could be more than 50% of the problem. But for the most part, in healthy relationships with two healthy people, 50% is all that you have to assume and assume responsibility for. And I think that's really the key thing for us all to do, don't you, Terri, is assume responsibility for our own actions, but not take on the responsibility of other people's.
Absolutely. I always say it's all about keeping your side of the street clean, but you've got to know what is your side of the street in order to do that.
I love that. I love that very much. Thank you for sharing that. Keeping your side of the street clean.
Hey, where can people get this amazing book, Heartbroken Open?
Yeah, just go to Amazon or you can go to my website. I have a multimedia version on my website. So where you get the audio, you get the physical book, you get videos from me, you get all of that. That's available on KristineCarlson.com. And you can go there and order the book for me direct and I'll sign it for you. Or you can go to Amazon and order it.
How amazing. I want to say thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. I really, really enjoyed it. You guys go out and get Heartbroken Open.
Thank you.
Thank you.